Why, hello again. Welcome back. If you are watching this video, then that means you're here for a quick lesson in poetry. Now, if you're one of my students in class, then you've already received an email with all the files necessary for this assignment. And if you are just some random passerby, welcome. We're going to talk about poetry today. It's going to be great. Okay, so welcome to my classroom. If you guys are in my class and you're not really sure where to look, all you need to do is check your email. So go ahead and look at the student portal, click on Office 365, which will bring you to a screen like this. Click on Outlook, which will bring you to your email. And when you actually open up your email, you want to find mine, which looks just like this. And here is the email. Here, this is a sample email I sent myself. And just so you guys know, there's a file attachment right here. You'll want to click on this little button that says Download. When you click on the Download button, it's going to go to your download folder. If you don't know what your download folder looks like, if you guys open up the File Explorer that looks just like this, you guys are going to want to navigate to your download folder, which is right there. And that's where this file will go, most likely. Okay? So anyway, you're here for some poetry, all right? Let's learn a thing or two about poetry. Okay, today we're going to be sampling a poem from Sara Teasdale. But before we talk about Sara Teasdale, we need to talk about Ray Bradbury. One of the short stories that I'm going to introduce in my classroom is There Will Come Soft Rains, which is written by Ray Bradbury in 1950, and it looks like this. It's about a robotic house, okay? A house made of robots that is a robot. So Ray Bradbury was an author that wrote a lot of science fiction, and he took a lot of inspiration from other people. One of the people that he took inspiration from is this lady named Sara Teasdale, who is a famous writer as well. So we are actually going to read one of her poems today, and this is going to build up to a lesson eventually that will become you reading There Will Come Soft Rains by Sara Teasdale and There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury, and then mashing the two together. Okay? So we're going to start really, really simple. All right. So just so you are aware, actually I should keep that up there. Just so you are aware, poetry can be a little challenging for some people, but that's totally fine. Okay, I'm going to walk you through it. If you were one of the students in my class, you were also given this assignment to complete today, and it looks just like this, okay? Now keep in mind, some of these questions are going to be personal opinion. However, when you're actually giving your personal opinion, I need you to be as detailed as possible, okay? Like for example, one of the questions is literally going to ask you, what are animals doing in the poem? Try to give me a full sentence, please, because that'll be helpful to everybody. All right, so here is the poem. Now, I'm just going to do like a straightforward read of the poem first, and if that's confusing for you, we will go back and pull this thing apart here. So I'm going to give you some general poetry advice as well as like stuff specific to this one, okay? So this is There Will Come Soft Rains by Sara Teasdale. It was written sometime between the years 1884 and 1933 for context, okay? Here we go. There will come soft rains and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. Okay, just kind of mull it over for a second. And if you guys are sitting there in your chair right now and you're like, yup, I'm confused. Okay, cool. It's time to get you unconfused. It's time to get you not confused. Sure, whatever. You guys get it. Okay, let's start off like this. If you guys are ever reading music or poetry, one of the best things that you can do for yourself is to try and break everything down into chunks and to try and tackle the lines one at a time. Also, there's like tip number one. Tip number two is this. If there's vocabulary that you don't understand in the poem, you have to take the time to actually look up what the words mean. Because if you don't take the time to look up definitions, you're never going to increase your own vocabulary skills, let alone understand what the poem is talking about. Keep in mind that that's going to be more applicable for things like Shakespeare and like complicated poetry, like from Walt Whitman or anyone who writes things that are like really, really long. In this poem, there might be a few words you don't understand. I will go through the most common ones that kids typically don't know, okay? So Here's what I do with my regular students. I ask them in this group of lines right here, what are the words you don't know? All right. Most of my students will mark these words as words that they don't understand. So we have swallows, shimmering, and tremulous. Okay. The rest of the words are pretty much par for the course. All right. Now, if we were doing this in person, by the way, I would recommend that my students write little annotations somewhere in the blank areas of the poem to indicate what these definitions are. I'm obviously doing this on the computer, so it's going to look a little weird, but I'm going to try my best to kind of imitate what I usually do in my regular classes. So just kind of bear with me here. It won't be perfect, but I'll try my best. So I have a little speech bubble here, and I can do whatever I need to do with that. Okay. Let's tackle the first one, swallows. Okay, if you don't know what swallows are, you literally have to just look it up. Swallows are a type of bird. And swallows look like this. They're little blue birds. Okay? Cool. That's what swallows are. All right. What do I write in here? They are birds. Or burbs, if you want to be that person. Next, we have the word shimmering. Okay? If you don't know what shimmering means, obviously you can look it up in the dictionary. And by the way, on a quick side note, if you are going to look up things in the dictionary, I would extremely recommend using Merriam-Webster as your dictionary source. It is definitely the best dictionary out there, but that's just me. Anyway, if you don't know what shimmering means, okay, shimmering is that sight that you get when you look at something that is shiny and it's like flickering in the sunlight and it's kind of getting in your eyes a little bit. Like if you've ever been to the beach and you've looked down at the water, you know, the water's moving and the rays of light are making little patterns in the water that are shifting and moving and everything. That's shimmering, okay? So shimmering can mean like shiny. So I'm just going to make it simple and say shiny. Now, the next word is tremulous. If you don't know what tremulous means and you look it up in the dictionary, it's going to be like characterized by tremors. Most kids actually know what tremors are. They're like the shakes. So if, you know, someone's tremoring, they're shaking like this, right? Well, that's what tremulous means. It means shaky. So, shaky, if you can spell it right. Shaky. All right, now let's just focus on these, this little group of lines here. There will come soft rains and the smell of the ground and swallows circling with their shimmering sound. Okay, swallows circling. So birds are circling, right? Well, when do birds circle anything? It's when they're flying, okay? With their shimmering sound. Well, how can a sound be shiny, right? See, Sara Teasdale here is using connotation and she's using a metaphor. What she's trying to do is describe a sound in a very particular way. Now, sounds can't be shiny, but that can still give you like a mental image. Most of my students will say like, oh, that's like a clear sound, or maybe like a dinging noise, or a piercing sound, or something like that. It's some kind of like clear, loud noise, okay? Going on to the next few lines. And frogs in the pools singing at night, so they're croaking. And wild plum trees in tremulous white, or shaky. It helps if you spell the word shaky right. Wow. Whoops. That's embarrassing, but what else is new? All right, check this out. In case you didn't know this, there are actually white plum trees. You just have to look them up. They look kind of like that. Their plums are not the deep purple that a lot of people know about, or know plums to look like. And, okay, why are they shaking? Well, it's because it's windy outside, right? So the thing to consider with this poem is that you have like, with this particular poem, you kind of have characters, even though usually in poetry you don't have characters. So far you have birds or swallows, you have frogs, and you have trees. Okay, and they're just kind of like there. They're just doing what they do. All right, let's move on. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. A lot of kids don't know what the word whims means, and when you look up whims, it means basically like a dream or a desire. So I'm just going to write desire, if you spell it right. Like if you ever hear somebody doing something on a whim, like it's a really impulsive decision, an impulsive desire, an impulsive dream, things like that, okay? Like they're doing something without little thought. Robins, by the way, in case you don't know what a robin is also a kind of bird. It is this kind of bird. Looks like a orangish red kind of color on its chest there. So keep in mind the coloring, and also Sara Teasdale describing it as feathery fire. So how can fire look feathery? It's another metaphor. There you go. What are these robins doing? They're just sitting on a wire or a fence, and they're just whistling. They're just doing what they usually do. Okay? Now, that's basically like the first half of the poem pretty much done. So the question that I would ask you from here is, are you still confused about what's happening in the poem? You shouldn't be. What do you have here? You have soft rain. You have birds that are circling around making noise. You have birds that are sitting making noise. You have frogs making noise. And you got trees that are just shaking in the wind. So is that normal behavior for all of those things? Well, the answer is yes. Those things are just kind of chilling, right? They're just vibing with nature. So let's continue on with the poem. And not one will know of the war. Not one will care at last when it is done. Okay, the question I usually ask my kids is, do we know what war is being talked about here? Because you can look at the dates of this poem, 1884 and 1933, and I guess you could make a guess. But, you know, does it really matter which war in particular it is? No, it doesn't. And when it says not one will know of the war, when she says not one will know of the war, what she's referring to are all of the characters that we previously introduced. So the birds, the trees, the frogs, etc. Okay, so the question is, do animals understand what war is? Well, if you think about it, probably not. Okay, while animals understand what killing is and things like that, they may not understand the concept of war because they may not understand the concept of politics and things like that. So war is like a foreign concept to them. Right? It's something that they can't even perceive, which is why Sara Teasdale, or the speaker of the poem, says, not one will care at last when it is done. So I usually ask my kids, will animals care if we are in a war? I mean, sure, if they're in danger, but for the most part, they won't even understand what's happening. Okay? Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. I would encourage you to look up those two words in particular on your own, because that is one of the questions with my assignment. If you don't know what perished means, go look it up. If you don't know what utterly means, go look it up. All right? And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. Okay? And if you don't know what scarcely means, scarcely basically means barely. Like if something is scarce, then that means it's hardly there. Okay, so barely or hardly. Also, the speaker is referring to spring herself. So, like, the concept of spring is a woman, okay? Spring herself. If you guys have ever read the webtoon Lore Olympus is a comic that a person created, Rachel, and it's taken the Greek gods and basically turned them into people, and then there's drama with those people. Now, Persephone is, like, I believe the goddess of springtime and things like that. So she is like a physical representation of nature. All right. In this poem by Sara Teasdale, we have basically the same concept here. Spring is being represented by a woman, like an actual being. Okay. So spring herself, when she wakes up, would barely know that we, meaning humans, were gone. All right. So by this point, you should have a pretty good idea, without me spelling it out, what is the poem actually saying. But I think it kind of speaks for itself. The first half of the poem is like setting up all the variables. There are animals here. The second half of the poem is saying what happens to all these animals if humans were to get into war. All right. Now, I don't want to spell it out for you because, again, this is for my students, but you should have a pretty good idea of what this poem is saying by now. All right. Now, one quick little thing before I leave you. If you are one of my kids who is doing this assignment, obviously, make sure you read the questions very carefully and answer in the most detailed way you possibly can, because the reader has not read the poem. They don't know what you're talking about, so you have to give full sentences. But this little section down here is going to ask you for symbols. Now, keep in mind, you guys took notes on symbols, if you guys ever followed the elements of narrative notes, and anything in this poem can be a symbol. What matters is what sticks out to you, and also what does it represent. So if you're going to pick, for example, like the concept of war, cool. War is a symbol. Sure. What does it mean, though? What does it mean in relation to the characters of the poem? What does it mean in relation to you? What does it mean in relation to Sara Teasdale? Things like that. Focus on what it means, okay? Now, that pretty much sums up that. So that is There Will Come Soft Rains by Sara Teasdale. I hope you enjoyed this poem, and I hope that video made sense. If you are one of my students, go do the assignment. If you're not one of my students, I don't know why you're watching this, but okay. Thanks for watching, I guess.